We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's June 27th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Ji-hee.
Good morning.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, you may have seen these bugs fly about if you lived in the northwestern parts of Seoul last year. They're love bugs, a type of March flies that are 6 to 8 millimeters long and often thought to be seen in pairs or stuck together due to mating. Well, they've come back again, this time in bigger numbers and across the whole capital and even up to parts of Gyeonggi-do province. Contrary to how threatening they look, love bugs don't bite or sting. They're rather helpful to growing plants and converting plant materials to nutrients. And the Federation of Korean Industries has found that if the minimum wage goes up from 9,620 won to 10,000, which is around $7.50, a large number of people will lose their jobs. More specifically, the group believes up to 69,000 may lose their jobs, and that's around 22% of those who recently landed one in the past 5 years. A professor from the FKI said that's mainly because small businesses have been seeing sales go down due to recession. Therefore, a higher minimum wage would burden them even more and push them to the brink of having to let some workers go. And the monsoon season has started here in South Korea. The Korea Meteorological Administration believes we'll see up to 44 millimeters of rain per hour fall in the greater capital area along with strong winds. Weather analysts expect a lot more torrential rain compared to last year due to the effects of El Nino. El Nino is a weather phenomenon that causes sea level temperatures in the eastern and central Pacific to be 0.5 degrees Celsius higher than usual for more than 5 months. And as we're bracing for a record monsoon season, a lot of people seem to have raced to malls or online shopping outlets to buy rain gear, specifically rain boots. Some rain boots companies have had their stock fully sold out since May. And Walter, were you one of the many that ran to go buy these rain boots or rain gear, especially since we've seen a lot of rain since last year?
Right, so no, for me, I have the same clothes for every season, summer, winter, autumn and spring. If it's winter, I just put on a t-shirt and a jumper. So I don't really prepare myself so much. I do have a raincoat, but I actually find that it's actually more difficult to wear because it's so humid during the monsoon season, right?
Sure.
So I end up, taking that off. I don't really see a lot of males as well wearing gumboots as compared to females. In Australia, when we use gumboots or rain boots, it's mainly for construction. But yes, I just hope the people who are in the areas that were badly affected by the monsoon last year are prepared this time around.
And what was interesting though you may not have rain boots, a lot of males here in Korea did buy them. That's why we're seeing all these rain boots companies' stocks go really high up, a lot of sales going up. And Ji-hee, how did you prepare ahead of the heavy rain? And did you change your vacation plans? Because I know that a lot of people did expect July to be a rainy month weeks back. So tell us how the monsoon season affected you.
Well, I'm really proud because I got a pair of rain boots
You did?
way in advance. And although I couldn't get the colors that I wanted, I got a pair of beige rain boots. They're really cute rain boots.
You should put them on and show us.
I should on a rainy day. And I got a new umbrella, not because I don't have any umbrellas at home. Well, I lost one actually. And this is a special umbrella, trust me, because usually the long ones, they close downward, right?
Yeah.
But this one, it folds upwards.
Oh, really?
When you close it, yes.
What's it for though? Why'd you buy that one?
So the water won't drip down and wet your clothes.
Whenever you go in the car or something.
Yes, exactly. So I recommend you buy them as well.
No, but you know what's really funny is before we had this episode, we were talking about the rain gear you bought, but you look so happy about it.
I am.
Yeah, and then I remember we changed our vacation plans too, right?
We did. On Friday, we're supposed to go to Gapyeong, right, Yoon? But
we can't because the monsoon season is kicking in. And though we're laughing about and talking about the rain gear that we all prepared, we do have to remember last year we've seen record rain pour, which costed a lot of lives. A lot of people were injured. The roads were wrecked. So we do need to keep our eyes on how this monsoon season will turn out. Hopefully, preparations are made well in advance. And that was our news feed for this Tuesday. We're now going to head into our discussion topic. Today, we're going to be talking about something that many adolescent girls girls have unfortunately experienced before. To find out what we'll be discussing, take a look at the screen. Intimate partner violence includes any type of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse caused by your current or former partner. While both sexes are susceptible to this form of violence, global organizations like UNICEF found that women and adolescent girls are at greater risk. In nearly half of 67 countries with available data, 1 in 5 girls aged 15 to 19 who have been married or had an intimate partner before said they've experienced physical or sexual violence by their partner within the past year. Korea is no exception. Week after week, we see headlines on how a former or current partner assaulted the other person. But what we're not seeing is whether they've been punished for such violence. That's mainly because South Korea doesn't have specific legislation penalizing intimate partner violence. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. Why should we care about intimate partner violence? How common is it among our generation? 2. How should we define intimate partner violence? 3. What needs to be done to make sure that figures go down? South Korea is trying its best to clamp down on intimate partner violence cases, but is it effective? Time will tell, but we can't and shouldn't just be waiting for change. We should proactively look for ways to prevent and penalize assailants. And Sihi, why don't you start our discussion off by telling us about recent cases of intimate partner violence and just how severe of an issue they're posing specifically to our generation?
Well, there are a lot of cases that we hear through articles, but this May recently there was a case where a man in his 30s, he killed his ex-girlfriend, and that was in revenge after she reported him to the police for dating violence. Now, the shocking thing about this particular case is that, like I said, the woman reported the man for intimate partner violence at first, but he was released after a police investigation and then killed her in retaliation, meaning that the current law and the system and all of us could have actually prevented this case from happening. Now, in addition to these murders, if you take a look at the graph on the screen, the number of injuries, threats, imprisonment, sexual assaults, and domestic violence cases has been steadily increasing over the past few years. And based on the trend in the first half of this year, the number is expected to be quite similar to that of last year. And what's more alarming is that the number of partner violence offenders in their teens has also been increasing, and that's by over 60% last year compared to the previous year. And experts explain that the cause of this could include increase in violent content and all those video streaming platforms that we have, and also a lack of gender equality education in the country.
That's a very important angle that we've also covered here on NewsGen a couple of times. Gender equality doesn't seem to be a very prioritized assignment that South Korea tackles. We're already seeing a lot of gender gap. A lot of reports actually annually report that South Korea has one of the biggest gender gaps in the world, so that's definitely an assignment we should be working on. But Walter, I would now like to expand our news discussion topic to that of worldwide. Are we seeing intimate partner violence cases abroad as well?
Yeah, of course we are. I mean, this is obviously not just happening in South Korea, but across the world. And as a father of a daughter, it's very concerning to hear that it is on the rise. Now, I'll use Australia as an example, as I grew up in Australia. The most recent survey from the Australian of Health and Welfare found that 1.6 million of the female population and around 548,000 of the men in Australia, just to give you an average, 25 million people in Australia were victims to physical or sexual abuse. Now, 2.2 million women and 1.4 million men suffered from emotional abuse within their intimate relationship. So my personal opinion is that this is obviously a very terrible thing, but it's hidden from society because people are either too embarrassed or they love their spouse too much to leave them. But this is something that we definitely need to bring forward to the public.
And what breaks my heart is when people blame the people that just stay in these relationships. I don't think it's necessarily the victim's fault for staying there. As you mentioned, they might be too afraid, they might be too ashamed. And as Chihi, as you mentioned in our very beginning of the discussion, it should be up to us to help these people out and give them the courage to come out to the table and say, this is what I'm going through. But also, legal institutions should be there for them to really rely on someone. And before we go any deeper, we're going to hear from our viewers to find out whether they've experienced experienced or witnessed intimate partner violence in their country. Take a look at the screen. Tara Spell said, yes, I was in a physically abusive relationship, although I didn't think of it that way. At first, I rationalized it, but as it got progressively worse, I only then realized I know a few of my friends who have experienced similar issues. It's not fun. Gazella Moreno said, I experienced overhearing a very heated fight between an old neighbor and her partner, yelling, crying, flying objects, etc. I called the police and they came over to check the situation. Howe said it can be physical and emotional. Both are able to cause severe damage. One is more obvious than the other by visual signs. And once again, I would like to thank our viewers for always giving their opinions and their 10 cents or even their experience to difficult topics like this. But another important angle to this topic is understanding that violence comes in many forms. Unfortunately, the Korean Women's Development Institute found out in April that most Koreans don't think a woman hurting or assaulting a man can be counted as partner violence. In fact, 9 out of every 10 adults surveyed define domestic violence only when a husband commits violence against his wife. And what do you think about that, Walter? And how would you then define intimate partner violence?
Okay, so we used to only know this term as domestic violence, right? However, we must understand that we are focusing today's episode on intimate partner violence, but this does fall under an umbrella of other terms such as family, domestic, sexual violence. At least in Australia, that's what I know of. It's not just physical or sexual violence, but also emotional, psychological, as well as coercive control. Example, like monitoring wherever you go, that's also a form of abuse. Now, I have also been in an emotionally abusive relationship, not me being the offender, but the victim. And in most cases, the men are forgotten. Yes, obviously the women are the ones that are mainly suffering, but the men out there are also forgotten. I grew up in a time where it was to man up. And so therefore, if we were abused, we shouldn't say anything because that's what a woman would do or something like that. But now times are changing. We're now at the point where we should be protecting ourselves, and now
regardless of gender.
Regardless of gender, and if you are hit, you should do yourself to protect yourself, not hit back, but obviously try and diffuse the situation as much as possible.
That's a great point, and I think it's really up to our generation to do that because, as we've discussed so many times before, our generation values equality. We're not all for the gender stereotypes that are out there. And Chihi, would you like to speak on behalf of our generation then to also define intimate partner violence?
Well, I think just as Walter mentioned very briefly, the definition of relationship violence, it includes not only physical violence or threats, but also psychological violence, such as gaslighting, as well as being too obsessive with your partner. And we hear this term quite a lot, gaslighting, on media platforms, and just we use that word quite a lot too. It's really common. And if any word or action is coercive and unpleasant to the partner, the other person, it can be considered violence in itself, right? And basically, any toxic relationship takes a toll on the person mentally and physically. And not only men, but also women are offenders, and they can commit physical crimes, violence, or even gaslighting, psychological crimes, violence, as well as financial violence.
Financial abuse.
And we should take note on that as well.
For sure, abuse comes in so many forms. If the person that you're with or your partner says it's not right, then it's obviously not right.
Exactly.
Now let's hear from an expert to find out whether the solutions or the definitions that we use to define intimate partner violence are going the right way, and see what we can do to better combat this societal issue. Let's hear from a professor of clinical law and director of the National Family Violence Law Center at George Washington University Law School. It's Professor Joanne Meyer. Welcome, Professor Meyer.
Thank you.
All right, I'd like to ask you the first question. How common is intimate partner violence in the States, and what do you think causes it?
Well, those are two pretty big questions. The data that we mostly use in the States is rather than a number of millions, although I think 10 million is one number I've seen. It's sort of 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience intimate partner physical violence, contact sexual violence, or stalking. with significant impacts, including injury, fear, post-traumatic stress disorder, et cetera. That's a very high number. 1 in 4 women, we're talking about severe stuff, not minor stuff.
Right.
And 1 in 9. What we don't know with the male statistic is who the perpetrators are, and there is some reason to believe that they are often male perpetrators victimizing their male partners. But there isn't a lot of evidence of women physically victimizing men, although no one really knows how much psychological aggression is common. The real issue, I think, in terms of defining abuse is whether it's an ongoing pattern and whether one partner is afraid of the other and their life is being constricted and constrained by the other. That's really how I would define it being abusive, even though it is certainly possible to be a victim and be saying very nasty things to the person who's victimizing you. So the mere saying of nasty things, I don't think quite gets us to what we should be talking about when we talk about abuse. I want to make one other clarification, which is that in the States, intimate partner violence is a term that's used to capture all domestic violence, not children, but all partner violence, including married couples and unmarried couples, dating couples. All of them are grouped under that. So for us here, IPV or domestic violence are pretty much fungible terms. But I understand in Korea, in South Korea, that you make a distinction between family, i.e. legal relationships, and not non-legal.
Right. There are different legal guidelines we use to define family for sure. But one question I would like to add is, what do you think causes IPV then?
So, I mean, that's a really tough question because there are a lot of different things that cause it. But I think the root of it is, and I saw that in some of the writing about South Korean, this phenomenon in South Korea, I think the root of it really is patriarchy. It grows out of a long history in the Western world in which men were supposed to be dominant and women were supposed to be subordinate. And, men ruled the family. The law actually made that clear, specifically allowed them to use physical punishment to chastise women and children, et cetera. And while those laws have been gone for a long time and we've had much more egalitarian laws and enforcement for a long time, I think the problem of the genders and what is expected of men and of women still fuels a lot of this problem. There's an enormous amount of entitlement and sense of prerogative that we see when men abuse women. It's like, you're supposed to do what I say. You don't see the same if a woman is trying to be abusive, she doesn't have the social backup to enlist the idea that she's supposed to be dominant, because she's not supposed to be. So I think there's, the social fabric sort of endorses the idea of male dominance to some degree, even when the law doesn't explicitly do that. So I think that's a big part of it. I think that there are other things like poverty plays a role sometimes, but we see so much intimate partner violence at all levels of class that I don't really like to say that it's a product of poverty.
Right. The social fabric is what causes it the most. That's a very good point you made there. Chihi, do you have a question for that?
Right. So what could happen when a survivor leaves an abusive partner then? If they have kids together, how do courts address child custody issues?
Yeah, so I really appreciated your talking about the importance of people disclosing and seeking help. And what I wanted to say about that is that unfortunately what we're seeing here, and we're seeing it in a lot of countries in the world, is that when women leave, they're not getting what they need. And as a result, many of them are regretting having left because, for instance, they're in court fighting for custody, either because they sued for custody or because the abuser who they left sued for custody, which is often kind of a punishment for leaving. You leave me, I'll get the kids. And you would think that that wouldn't be a very realistic threat, but unfortunately it is a very realistic threat. And many abusive fathers are getting custody of the children in contested custody battles in court. That's true in the U.S., and I spearheaded an empirical study that proved what was happening numerically here, but we're finding the same pattern all over. We've got a journal that published 12 different articles from 12 different countries about the same pattern. It seems to be happening everywhere, that when it comes to the battle over the children, courts are very reluctant to restrict fathers, even when fathers are alleged to be abusive. And there's a tendency, and I think I read some of that in relation to some of the international interventions with regard to South Korea, I saw that some of the governmental responses said things like, there are so many false allegations, etc. Well, that's really not true. There are not so many false allegations, but there is a tendency to assume that allegations are false and to treat them as though they are, and then to punish women who raise these allegations in court. So leaving is far higher risk than it should be for women. It also increases the risk of homicide. That's when your risk of homicide is at its peak, is when you leave, which is why when this woman you talked about, that she was killed after she reported, that was a form of leaving. Calling the police was a form of leaving, and he, you know, it was too high risk. She shouldn't, it was too bad that she thought she was going to get help, and instead she got killed.
So, Professor, we're running out of time, but quickly, I think this is an important question. Then what are some protection orders or legislation against intimate partner violence in the States, and how could Korea benchmark this of some laws there? I mean, I know it's a big topic, but yeah, could you quickly explain to us?
Yeah, so I mean, I believe that Korea does have protection orders for domestic violence, i.e. family relationships. I think that should be available equally to people who are not married or not in formal legal relationships. In fact, I distinctly recall arguing in front of my local legislature why they should expand the protection orders here in DC to non-married couples. And it took some persuading, because they thought, well, this problem of domestic violence and patriarchy is attached to family. So it shouldn't be, you know, the same isn't true when people aren't married. And the answer is, well, the same is true. The problem of patriarchy and dominance and control cuts across gender relationships, whether they're married or not. And so long ago, probably 20 plus years ago, we expanded our statute to cover unmarried people equally. And I think that's a really important step. I think protection orders are really, really helpful and important. You obviously need to work hard on enforcement.
We should definitely expand it. For sure, because we're now seeing families come in different forms, relationships coming in different forms, that's per se. Now, thank you so much, Professor Meyer, for sharing so much information and your insight today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, and the professor just shared so much valuable information, and Korea should definitely benchmark off the fact that we shouldn't only put protection orders on domestic violence, but the fact that we're seeing more different types of families and relationships, intimate partners, that is. So lastly, why don't we share our thoughts on why our generation should pay close attention to what we discussed today?
Well, because the professor also mentioned that it's not just issues like economic issues or poverty, but also social fabric, the culture behind it. I feel like our generation can really take action to change that from our level, first of all. So we must all be able to remind ourselves that we're not immune to these violence. None of us are. And we have to really spot the signs in ourselves and the people around us and provide help.
It could be our friends and family.
Exactly. And also give the courage to really leave those abusive relationships if you're in one.
And not just leave, but as the professor mentioned, think about the custody rates and the legal protection that you can get for sure. And what about you, Walter?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, obviously, the higher ups down to the people like the citizens. So the government really needs to implement something where they're actually giving, you know, education to children from a very early age up until high school and even further on.
All right, and that's all we have for you today. We'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
And Walter Lee.
See you next time.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.